The cold cuts through steel. It's December 1942, and the Arctic Ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. After PQ-17, after the disaster that tore through convoy after convoy, the Royal Navy went quiet. They watched. They waited. They learned. Summer convoys were a death sentence, that much was clear. Broad daylight gave the Luftwaffe too many hours to hunt, too many chances to kill. So they paused. They held back. The planned PQ-19 40 ships strong never sailed. Instead, lone merchantmen tried their luck in what they called Operation FB. Scattered vessels slipping through darkness and blizzards, gambling that winter's fury would hide them better than any escort ever could. And it worked, mostly. The Germans had pulled their best attack planes south to hit Operation Torch in the Mediterranean, leaving Norway with nothing but obsolete aircraft and the ever-present U-boats prowling beneath black waves. The darkness saved them. The storms saved them. Most of those ships made it through. But Operation FB was the last gasp of the old PQ series. Now, months later, the Soviets still needed supplies and the Mediterranean offensive was winding down. So the convoys had to start again. New designation. New strategy. The WWII series. Outbound and return. This would be the naming convention that carried them all the way to the end of the war. Mid-December 1942, Convoy JW51B departed. 16 merchant ships with a modest escort. Minesweepers, corvettes, trawlers keeping close. 6 older destroyers nearby, 2 light cruisers, and a battleship far in the distance. It wasn't the overwhelming force that had supposedly protected PQ-17, but the British Admiralty was betting on winter. Deep Arctic winter. The kind of cold that froze compasses and covered bulkheads with ice on the inside of the ship. The German battleship Tirpitz was down south getting a refit, and the only heavy hitters left in Norway were the cruisers Admiral Hipper and Lützow. The convoy slipped past unnoticed. The Germans, bored after months of no Allied activity, missed it entirely. JW51B made it through without a scratch. But the planners in London and Admiral Tovey were arguing about tactics. Tovey wanted small, fast convoys, easier to manage, quicker to escort, less vulnerable. London wanted big convoys, the old way, strength in numbers. The compromise was splitting planned convoys in 2. So 7 days after JW51B sailed, JW51B followed. 15 merchant ships. Close escort, minesweeper Bramble, corvettes Hyderabad and Rhododendron, trawlers Vizalma and Northern Gem. Commander Rust commanded from the Bramble. Then came the destroyers. 2 older vessels, Achates and Bulldog, plus 5 modern O-class destroyers, Obdurate, Obedient, Onslow, Oraby and Orwell. Captain Sherbrooke flew his pennant from Onslow. He was no stranger to Arctic fighting. He'd commanded at Narvik. He knew how the Germans thought, how they moved, and he had a plan. If enemy surface ships attacked, the older destroyers would lay smoke and hold back as reserve while his O-class ships formed a battle line and hit them hard. Aggressive defense. Hit first, hit fast, make them think twice. But the weather had other ideas. Heavy seas damaged the Bulldog badly enough to force her back to port. The plan lost a ship before the fight even started. Distant cover came in layers. Battleship Anson with the cruiser Cumberland and 5 destroyers far out in deep water. Closer in, the light cruisers Sheffield and Jamaica with destroyers Matchless and Opportune under Admiral Burnett. Designated Force R, the idea was clever. Force R would sweep west ahead of the convoy, pass through the danger zone first, catch any German ships heading out to attack, or at least be close enough to double back and help if things went wrong. On Christmas Eve, German reconnaissance spotted the convoy. U-354 picked up the trail. Captain Herbschleb, commanding the U-boat, stayed back, stayed quiet. Too many radar sets in the escort screen. Too many destroyers with active sonar pinging through the dark water. Better to shadow, report position, wait for the surface ships to do the killing. Then the weather turned savage. Visibility dropped to nothing. Crews roped themselves to their ships just to go on deck and clear ice buildup. Temperature plunged. Water pipes froze inside the vessels. Interior bulkheads became sheets of ice. Equipment failed. Destroyer Orabi lost her gyro compass and radar to a single massive wave. Her magnetic compass was useless this close to the North Pole, and the storm made celestial navigation impossible. No stars. No sun, no moon. Just darkness and snow. Orabi had to do what medieval sailors did, head vaguely south, hope to find land without hitting it, then follow the coast east until reaching Russia. Somehow, that plan would actually work. The Germans weren't expecting the British destroyer to materialize off occupied Norway, and the weather made spotting anything impossible anyway. But the convoy had lost another escort. Then merchant ships started disappearing. Jefferson Myers and Dahlonega had deck cargo shift, bombers threatening to break loose. Both hove to. The port column followed them, losing touch with the main convoy. Trawler Vasalma, navigating by keeping station on the center ship of that column, followed along into the darkness. Freighter Daldorf took heavy damage and turned back. On the evening of December 28th, with the weather easing slightly, Sherbrooke reformed his remaining 9 merchant ships and sent Commander Rust in the Bramble to find the stragglers. Bramble was small, lightly armed, but she had good radar. Best chance of finding lost ships in this mess. Next day, most of the merchants straggled back. Vasalma and the freighter Chester Valley were somewhere north, trying to navigate back. Bramble was still out searching. U-354 kept shadowing, catching glimpses through breaks in the storm. With Orabi and Vasalma gone, Bramble detached and visibility near zero, the U-boat reported the convoy looked weakly escorted. Easy prey. The submarine spent the night of December 29th to 30th working ahead on the surface, riding waves that would terrify any sailor on a full-sized warship. Absolute nightmare conditions in a Type VIIC U-boat. Morning of the 30th, U-354 made her move. Obdurate sensors caught her almost immediately. The destroyer turned to ram. The U-boat crash-dived, escaped, but lost her forward position and fell back into pursuit again. The Germans decided to risk their surface forces. 1800 hours, December 30th. Cruisers Admiral Hipper and Lützow sailed with 6 destroyers. Friedrich Eckelt, Richard Beetzen, Theodor Riedel, Z-29, Z-30, and Z-31, Standard Kriegsmarine orders. Destroy the convoy. Do not engage superior forces. Don't rescue survivors. Lützow had an additional mission, break out into the Atlantic after destroying the convoy. They headed northwest first, bypassing suspected Allied submarine lines, then swung northeast toward the intercept. As they settled on course, new orders came through. Do not engage even equal enemy forces. Admiral Cummets, commanding from Hipper, was informed that aerial reconnaissance had spotted 2 cruisers leaving Kola. That was Burnett's Force R, though they'd actually left days earlier. The German plan, Operation Regenbogen, Rainbow, formed a broad skirmish line. Hipper north, Lützow south, destroyers spread between them. They'd sweep toward the convoy's reported position, destroyers making first contact. Then the cruisers would close from both sides in a pincer, while the destroyers fell back to support. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it was the perfect counter to Sherbrooke's plan, because Sherbrooke expected an attack from the south. His destroyers would engage Lützow while Hipper fell on the undefended convoy. 715 hours, December 31st, 1942. Lookouts on Hipper spotted elements of the convoy. Still dark. Deep Arctic winter. The German ships began forming attack groups while Hipper slowed, broke contact, worked into better position. Her 3 destroyers kept contact. Comets wanted to wait for better light. The brief appearance of the sun over the horizon would let them use optical rangefinders since German radar wasn't good enough for gunnery alone. Dawn approached, if you could call it that. Wind calmed slightly. Waves still massive. Temperature well below freezing. Visibility came and went with snow squalls sweeping over the area, better to the south, worse to the north. 820 hours. Hyderabad's radar picked up something astern. Might be a straggler. Might be a Russian destroyer. She stayed quiet at first. Then Obdurate's lookouts visually identified 3 German destroyers. Sherbrooke ordered investigation. The German destroyers fell back northwest toward Hipper. 930 hours, range down to 8,000 yards. The Germans opened fire on Obdurate. Gun flashes lit the gloom. Obdurate doubled back. Sherbrooke ordered Onslow, Orwell, and Obedient to form up while Achates and the corvettes laid smoke across the convoy's rear. As the British reacted, so did Comets. Hipper would proceed east at full speed to meet his destroyers and close the convoy. Lützow and her 3 destroyers would form up and head northeast to close the trap. Hipper swung about, revealed her profile to the British destroyers. Heavy cruiser. 940 hours. Both sides broke radio silence. Comets reporting he was attacking. Sherbrooke informing everyone of the enemy presence. Hipper opened fire, initially thinking the British destroyers might be her own in the poor visibility. Not the last time that day the weather would cause misidentification. But when Achates started making smoke, it became clear these were not German ships. Obedient and Onslow used radar to open fire at around 10,500 yards, then swung to match Hipper's course. The Germans drew away north. Sherbrooke was surprised. He was outnumbered 2-1, outgunned 7-1. Until he remembered he had torpedoes. In the darkness, at this range, he was at the edge of effective torpedo range. The Germans were under orders not to risk their heavy ships. Sherbrooke realized this and proceeded to conduct an unequal but violent skirmish, making brief dashes at the German formation, training his torpedo tubes on them, faking launches to scare them into drawing away, forcing them further from the convoy, buying time for Obedient and Obdurate to join up. The convoy, seeing action and smoke behind them and a port, altered course southeast, unknowingly heading straight toward Lützow. Sherbrooke grew cautious. The 3 German destroyers had vanished into darkness and haze. He feared Hipper might be drawing him off to let the destroyers circle around and hit the convoy. He ordered Obdurate and Obedient back to help with smoke while Onslow and Orwell kept snarling at Hipper. Then 2 pieces of good news arrived. Hipper was breaking off, heading north. Admiral Burnett's Force R was approaching from the same direction. Burnett had only the vaguest idea where the convoy was since dead reckoning was useless in these conditions. He'd kept heading northwest, thinking the convoy was much further north. His radar picked up contacts, turned out to be Vizalma and Chester Valley. Knowing they were north of the convoy, Burnett swung south. Shortly after 0900, he saw gun flashes further south. There was confusion about exactly where everyone was, but Burnett decided to follow Royal Navy tradition and steer for the sound of the guns. Force R cranked up to full speed and drove south. 1,015 hours. Lützow and her destroyers were only about 14,000 yards south of the convoy, but couldn't see them through the weather. The 2 courses converged. Then, as if sensing this, Hipper suddenly reversed course and drove at Onslow and Orwell with all guns blazing. Her gunnery, ineffective until now, suddenly found its mark. Onslow was hit by 4 8-inch shells. Forward guns knocked out. Radar destroyed. Radio antenna severed. Funnel blown away. Hole punched in the engine room. The bridge showered with shrapnel. Dead and wounded everywhere. Fire and flooding. Sherbrooke took a face full of shrapnel. One large piece of German steel hit him hard enough to temporarily dislodge his left eye. He got back on his feet. Organized damage control. As Onslow lost speed, he ordered Lieutenant Commander Kinloch in Obedient to take over flotilla command. Arwell made smoke to cover Onslow's withdrawal. Shells rained down. Then a snow squall swept over Hipper. Her fire slackened. She turned away. Satisfied things were in hand. Sherbrooke finally let himself be persuaded that eyes belong inside one's skull and went below for medical attention. Corvette Rhododendron reported smoke from a large ship heading northeast, spotted just southeast of the convoy. At first, they doubted the report. Almost directly opposite Hipper's last known location. But it was Lützow, now less than 12,000 yards from the convoy. The German ships were caught in another snow squall. Instead of attacking as they crossed the convoy's path, they kept going, waiting for better visibility. Meanwhile, toward the northeast, a message came from Bramble. The 900-ton minesweeper had been racing to rejoin. The convoy, when a break in the weather revealed a cruiser dead ahead, Hipper. Such was the range that Bramble had no chance of escape. Commander Rust saw Hipper's 8-inch turrets rotate toward him. He'd been through 8 outbound Arctic convoys. If he was going down, he wasn't going down without a fight. Bramble swung about and beat Hipper to the punch, opening fire with both 4-inch deck guns. It was a fight that could only end one way. Hipper's gunfire overwhelmed the gallant little minesweeper. Comets left Friedrich Eckelt to finish her off. Bramble went down with all hands. Hipper had traveled far enough east that she was now northeast of the convoy, heading south again to engage. Lützow had come up past the convoy to the east. Obedient spotted Lützow and thought she opened fire, but no shells landed. The flashes were actually Hipper's guns, directly behind Lützow from Obedient's perspective, finishing Bramble. The German pincer had failed. The arms snapped shut ahead of the convoy, leaving all German ships east-northeast of the merchantman. But it was still 2 heavy cruisers and 6 large destroyers against 3 fully operational O-class destroyers, the damaged Onslow, the older Achates, 2 trawlers, and 1 corvette. As Lützow's course revealed Hipper behind her, the latter opened fire on Achates. Lützow remained oddly silent. An 8-inch shell hit the old destroyer, wiping out the bridge and the forward super-firing gun. Another punched a hole in the boiler room. Captain dead. Forward section aflame. Lieutenant Peyton Jones resolved that since Achates couldn't join a high-speed attack, she'd stay with the convoy and continue making smoke. Even as damage control worked, more shells from Hipper rained down. Achates began listing to port. Shrapnel drove the crew under cover. The convoy altered course south. The 3 operational O-class destroyers made another dummy torpedo run, intimidated Hipper into breaking off and firing on them instead. With the German cruiser falling back, the 3 British destroyers fell back to cover the convoy. Trawler Northern Gem moved to assist Achates, but assistance quickly became rescue. They had to act fast. Freezing water sapped survivors of energy. One of Achates' crew remembered, "I was so numb. I waited for the swell to take me up to the net. Then I just pushed my arms and legs through the mesh and hung there until 2 ratings came down over the side and pulled me aboard. With a 3rd helping by the hair, I flopped on deck. Then the numbness wore off and the cold hit me. I've never felt anything like the pain that racked my body." Another recalled, "The hands couldn't do what the brain told them." Some of the wounded managed to get to the Gem's side. We tried to get them up first. But after a while, it was each man for himself. I had a line thrown over me. Thankfully didn't do anything other than take 2 turns around my forearm and stick the end in my mouth. I was 22 at the time. Northern Gem's crew climbed down to haul half-frozen men aboard, subjecting themselves to the freezing sea. wrapping legs in netting, reaching down to pull men from the water. The roll of the ship dunking them repeatedly in the ocean. Soon a stream of survivors and half-frozen trawler crew were moved to compartments around the boiler to warm up. Medical help came from one ordinary seaman whose total experience was being married to a nurse and having doctor friends ashore. Better than nothing. Lützow finally remembered she was a warship and made to engage the convoy. Too late. Burnett's cruisers arrived from the north, having tracked everything by radar. He swung his ships to starboard to match Hipper's course at just under 12,000 yards and opened fire. Thanks to weather cover and reduced flash propellant, the first Comets knew of this threat with 6-inch shells raining down around him. Hipper was heading northwest to avoid another fake torpedo run when the British cruisers struck. She responded with a single salvo before looping under her own smoke and heading southwest. British gunnery was good. A 6-inch shell damaged machinery, caused a boiler to go offline as water flooded the fuel feed, forced the starboard turbine to shut down, dropped the ship's speed. Other hits set fires as volatile materials in the aircraft storage area ignited. Caught between the new arrivals and the continuing defiance of the convoy destroyers, Comets ordered all ships to break off and retreat west. 1,137 hours. Sheffield and Jamaica lost their target briefly as Hipper's smoke obscured her. Then German destroyers Friedrich Eckelt and Richard Beetzen appeared. They'd lost contact with the larger German ships. Since the only large warships they'd seen had been friendlies, they thought Burnett's cruisers were Hipper and Lützow and moved to join up. Seeing 2 German destroyers apparently closing, Burnett showed none of Comets' hesitation and drove at them with all guns blazing, passing at such close range that even the pom-poms swept their decks and the 6-inch guns were depressed beyond official limits. Eckelt was torn apart in minutes. Beetzen, a little further away, beat a hasty retreat. Lützow, having received the order to withdraw, instead decided to open fire for the first time, but not at Burnett's cruisers. She took potshots at the convoy's merchant ships. Best she achieved was splinters from near misses hitting freighter Calibre to little effect. British destroyers laid another smokescreen, then headed off in pursuit of the retreating Germans. Comets repeated his withdrawal signal at 1,148. Lützow engaged in a gunnery duel with British destroyers for 10 minutes before the latter decided. Their work was done and broke off to return to the merchant ships. Force R was under no restrictions and pressed on after the Germans, spotting Hipper at about 21,000 yards briefly before the weather closed in. Then at 12:23, 2 German destroyers were seen at 9,000 yards. Burnett's ships moved to close. Lützow emerged out of the weather behind the destroyers. Sheffield and Jamaica engaged her. Hipper joined in. Though Lützow's gunnery was poor, Hipper's was good. Faced with 8-inch and 11-inch fire versus his own 6-inch guns, plus the Germans looking like they might split Force R from the convoy, Burnett altered course to drop out of range while staying between Comets and the convoy, keeping radar lock. Last shots fired at 12:36. Final radar contact broken at 1400. Worried that light cruiser Nürnberg might be around somewhere, Burnett patrolled south briefly. The battle was over. The convoy's merchantmen would all reach their destination undamaged. Surviving escorts patched up battle damage and took stock. Northern Gem came alongside, obdurate in rough weather to allow the destroyer's doctor to jump over and treat Achates survivors. The trawler was then subjected to such heavy seas that the doctor had to be physically held in position by crew so he could operate with both hands, patient strapped down on mess tables. Sherbrooke was awarded the Victoria Cross for seeing off Hipper's initial attack and staying at his post after being wounded. He recovered, rejoined naval service, later retired in the mid-1950s as a rear admiral. It might not surprise you that before commanding Onslow, he'd commanded tribal-class destroyers, including Cossack at the Battle of Narvik, which explains his extremely aggressive defense. The Admiralty pointed out that although the British ship's task was defensive, they'd spent most of the action acting aggressively. The Germans, whose sole reason for being there was offensive, had played defensively for most of the engagement. This sentiment was shared on both sides. Upon hearing of the engagement, from the BBC, no less since Comets kept radio silence until reaching port. Hitler was apoplectic, ordering wholesale scrapping of the surface fleet. Their guns stripped for shore batteries. Admiral Raeder failed to persuade him otherwise and resigned. Admiral Burnett was placed in command. Though he managed to save some surface forces, work on carrier Graf Zeppelin and upgrading damaged Gneisenau was abandoned permanently. Hipper, recalled to Germany for repairs, never re-entered frontline service. All in all, a successful start to the resumed Arctic convoys from the Allied perspective, a trend that would continue. JW52, 54A, 54B, 55A, and 55B wouldn't lose a single merchant ship in transit. JW55B, almost exactly a year later, would see the destruction of Scharnhorst with several ships from this engagement present once again: Sheffield, Jamaica, Onslow, Orwell, Opportune, and Matchless, with Admiral Burnett also making a reappearance, this time aboard Belfast. That day in the Barents Sea didn't just prove the convoy system could work. It proved that courage under fire, aggressive action in defense, and refusing to back down even when outgunned, could turn the tide of an entire campaign. The guns may have fallen silent that New Year's Eve, but their echoes still whisper across the frozen Arctic waters, a reminder that sometimes the smallest ships carry the biggest hearts, and that in the darkest winter, in the coldest sea, humanity's fire burns brightest